I argued that near is better than far, that small is better than big, and that simple is better than complex. And in the footnotes at 5-point type, get your reading glasses on. You're my listener, the man with one gray eyebrow peeking out there over your irises. You can pull that out. Get those reading glasses on, and you'll need it, because in 5-point type, down in the footnotes, which I do believe in footnotes, you'll find this: that personal is better than corporate, and that physical beats abstract almost every time. Almost every time. These are the nostrums, the axioms, if you will, of local economy and the free market. A concept which has been taking a beating lately in the free market press. The free marketers are very principled people, and as libertarians, they see a lot of evil in my conception of local economy and free market. My prejudice, if you will, it is a prejudice. It is a kind of provincialism that goes against my upbringing as a public school person. I went all through public school all my life, and I'm well versed in the proper mode of thinking as a public school person, and that is to be cosmopolitan, to not really belong anywhere, to not have any really strong connection with a place. And the reason nationalism always beats down localism is that you're not supposed to identify with your city or your county, and really not even your state, but with the nation. You're supposed to have the big view. You're supposed to be man about things, and not petty and provincial, right? Not narrow-minded and bigoted. Because if you care about Chattanooga over the nation, well, you're just a bigot, man. You shouldn't even watch TV. Who are you to have any vote, have any say in how things are run? If you have simply a local interest, representing Tennessee, or Chattanooga, who cares about Chattanooga or Hamilton County? Just forget about it. That's just being small-minded, narrow-minded. And in the end, this perspective, the national perspective, defeats local economy, and has in fact changed our culture. We are a nation, as they say, of 50 republics. Well, we don't actually say that. We just say we're a nation, and we entirely forget where we came from. The Union of States and the political alliances in the 1800s and the 1900s, and we're not identifying anymore with local conditions, and so we're trained by media and our customary ways of thinking, to think that what happens in Washington or Brussels or New York matters more than what happens on Main Street, right, or East 11th Street, where the mayor's office is right next to the federal bankruptcy court, right? We care more about the national than the local. And I understand that. I mean, I share in that as well, and I'm trying to unlearn it, trying to live out my ideal. And in a nutshell, in a slogan, the ideal possibly for you might be love your neighbor and buy local, and love your neighbor, care local, right? Love your neighbor, think local, think locally and act locally, might be better than the environmentalist argument of thinking globally and acting locally. They pretend to care about the planet and their Gaia deity that is embodied in the earth itself and in nature, and so they have this magnanimous grandeur in their viewpoint, but they understand that you have to act locally, and that of course is what Saul Alinsky would say. Think very much in terms of local results, and ridiculing the enemy, and overturning the system on behalf of the progressive theory, right? One office at a time, one protest at a time, one startling assertion at a time, and that is, Alinsky has a lot of things right. He is essentially a localist in politics, and I think his book, though it is dedicated to Lucifer, is worth having, and you probably should, if you see a used copy somewhere, make sure you get that, because he has a lot to say, and understanding the human dynamic, and as Bertie Wooster hears his steward say, the psychology of the individual, right? And that's what That is what we have in the Great Woodhouse fictions. Well, this is David Tulis, and we're brought to you by Nooganomics.com. Today, I have a couple of things to mention. One is the Bill of Rights dinner that is taking place in Dayton on the 15th, the Bill of Rights dinner. And it's organized by, we're not the organizers here at Nooga Radio, 92.7 FM and 95.3. We're not the originators of that event, but I'm putting it out there just so you'll have a chance to meet me. If you want to sit down and break bread with your host here, I'd love to have you. It's $25 a person. It is in Dayton at 5:30 on a Friday evening, the 15th of December. I won't have a lot of time to chat, I'm afraid. What I do is I quickly down my meal and then get some interviews in among the assembled host. And, it's not a huge crowd, but it is replete of people who are patriotic, you could say, and they're constitutional-minded people. They're often devout Christians, and many are homeschoolers. Many are have independent ways, and appreciate the private life. Many of them are convinced that the Ten Commandments is an apt summary of justice, and you'll find people like that. So if that's something, if those ideas are a little strange to you, well, let me just suggest you attend, and you can meet people like that. They're not like common run-of-the-mill business person you meet at a chamber lunch. Okay, they're not like that, always thinking about business and always thinking about networking and getting ahead. They're people who really think deeply about things and sometimes get themselves into trouble, and that's why they're so interesting, because they're troublesome folk, right? They are resistant of the normal things that we do in the way of concessions. We are constantly making concessions to the state and making concessions against our inheritances, if you will, our estates. And we do that by involving ourselves with corporate government and, in fact, living out the lives of corporate persons rather than doing things, you might say, in persona propria, in your proper natural person as a human being, as a man or a woman, right? Or in the case of some people, as people of unknown identity, who I think probably have big legal problems if they are neither male or female or transitioning. How do the distinctions in creation between male and female not apply? I'm sure that throws our betters in Nashville and Washington into fits. How do we control people who don't identify with male or female, which are the categories by which we control folks through the corporate, the making of corporations of people, individual biped corporations, which we all are today. Now, there's a story in Chattanooga.com I wanted to mention by Gail Perry, and she does a very good job in describing the Signal Mountain escape from the school system. And since my time was committed this morning to other projects, namely reading a kind of a lengthy lawsuit, I don't think I can really do justice as to the advice given to a whole room full of people over 2 hours Tuesday. It was actually Monday night, as Gail is reporting it at Chattanooga.com. And two experts came from the Memphis area. Jason Manuel, who is the superintendent of Germantown Municipal Schools, and then Tammy Mason from Arlington Community Schools. Tammy was joined by Valerie Speakman, an attorney. Now, these people give a very good discussion about the exit of these schools from the main system. It involves taxes, it involves other questions that I can't fairly boil down what Gail has reported, but do read that story today at Chattanooga.com. There was a referendum in 2013 in Memphis, and doors opened in the Germantown school in August of 2014. So it's 3 years in the making, or 3 years now up and running, I should say. And this, I'd say, is this story about 2 hours of Q&A and the stimulus of these new districts in Memphis for Signal Mountain are valuable for us here. And it's valuable in general. And one of the reasons I think so is that as Walter Williams writes at Lou Rockwell today, there is globally a trend of breaking apart these broken systems. Right, the bigger the systems get, whether they're states, whether they're nations, they end up being, their true oppressions finally become overwhelming, and the common people, rise up in disgust and frustration. And Walter Williams, whose work appears at the Chattanooga Times Free Press, I believe every Sunday, has a column about Catalonia, the capital of which is Barcelona. And I was hearing yesterday from my son, a 14-year-old, just about to turn 15, who last year took a trip with his sister, a sculptress in Manhattan. And I was just remembering that trip. He was gone for a month and leaving Jeanette and me in an empty house. And he was gone for a month with his sister on an art tour. Now they went, this pair, she's 24 at the time. He was, I guess, 14. They went to numerous cities, including Barcelona. They were in Venice for a week. He said yesterday at dinner, talking to his grandmother, who forgets everything the moment she hears it. So he was repeating himself for her benefit. And in Barcelona now, where this young pair stayed for several days, there was a 92% vote in favor of independence from Spain. Walter Williams is reminding us that the authorities opposed the referendum, said that it was illegal, and there are others who are seeking independence as well, just like the Signal Mountain families want to have independence from Hamilton County. And they are in Bavaria, in Germany. And then there is another part of the world, and that is the Veneto region of Italy. I believe that's the northern Po Valley region, the highly productive part, which feels its residents feel dragged down by the rest of the state. You know, the lazy Italians, as they're often thought to be. This I have relatives in Switzerland, and they all look down on the Italians and on the Italian Swiss, the Italian speaking Swiss, where the homes of the cities are messier. There's not as much care. There's a lot of break taking and lying around kind of impression that these tough Germanic Swiss have of the less tough French Swiss have of their lower neighbors in the southern part of Switzerland. Germany has done in Bavaria what Spain and Italy in their Veneto region have done, Walter Williams says. It upheld the integrity of state borders. He cites an article by a writer named Joseph Fallon from the UK Defense Forum, and it's titled "The Catalan Referendum, Regional Pressures, the EU, and the Ghosts of Eastern Europe." Berlin, he says, is violating international law on national self-determination. It denies to Bavaria what it granted to the 19 states that seceded from Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union. In fact, Germany rushed to be first to recognize the independence of Slovenia and Croatia. And Walter Williams is here quoting Joseph Fallon in a research paper. It did that, he says, according to Beverly Crawford, an expert on Europe at Berkeley, in open disregard of the European Community Agreement to recognize the two states under EC conditionality requirements. And so we have secessionist movements. And of course, Walter Williams, the libertarian, celebrates this prospect. And he says Catalonia, Bavaria, and Veneto are relatively prosperous jurisdictions in their countries. They feel that that what they get from the central government is not worth the taxes that they pay. Each wants the central government off its back. They think, he says, they could be far more prosperous on their own. What about Chattanooga? You know, Dave Crockett, the candidate for mayor recently and the former city council member for 3 terms, has in view the idea of an independent city-state, which is the Chattanooga region. It's not bound by the borders of the 3 states that the region envisions, right? Similar to the Thrive 2055 scheme, which is an attempt to administratively create this region. The purpose of that being, of course, to draw more from the tit of Washington. It's not really one that has a sense of internal coherence, but it is to create a city-state, as it were, for the purposes of drawing more subsidies and making a coherent platform by which to from which to beg for transportation dollars and other subsidies. But Crockett has the idea, and I ask the same question as Dave does. What about us here in Chattanooga. What do we have to do to think in terms of independence in the future? This is a worldwide phenomenon. The United States is bankrupt. It is a bankrupt entity, and its misfortunes, as it constantly bumps up against the debt ceiling, will have an effect on the psychology of the mass, right? Which would be led, of course, by the giant investment houses such as CalPERS, the California Retirement System, and many others, which are effectively sovereign funds. Tennessee has one, a sovereign wealth fund, state-owned, greater and bigger than the state itself, right? It's worth more than the state itself. It is a sovereign wealth fund that is not accountable to anybody and tax-free. It is tax-free, is a state body. These funds will lead the stampede at some point out of equities. And the question is, will when they've sent their sale orders into the market, you'll have heard about it. You'll hear about it 3 days later, and by then you'll have lost 25% of your value. I'm supposing, and so just watch out. Again, independence is ahead, breaking up of these broken systems which cannot reform themselves. The coming to the edge of the cliff is nearer every day, and the cliff may be a long steep slope. It could be a sudden drop, a cataclysmic drop, mirroring the reverse side. Bubbles. If you look at the charts on many forms of pseudo wealth, of paper fiat money wealth, they are rising very strong, nearly not verticals, but they're close. The Bitcoin bubble has proven to be that almost a straight up line. When that happens, it's not sustainable, and you should not be a part of that. There's a story that moved Monday that I wanted to mention to you, that I did an update on the wires this morning to see what's new. It is out of Sevier County, and it is there's a line at the chapter heading in the book I'm reading by Alex Vitale. Just by the way, Alex Vitale's book, it's called The End of Policing. And there's a chapter that says, "We called for help and they killed my son." And that is about the mentally ill. And the story out of Sevier County is of a man in that position. He seems to have had some kind of problem. I'm looking here at a printout from TV9's website based on a press release from the TBI, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, that gives preliminary information. Sheriff's Office responded to the residence of Timothy McGill, age 41. That's the name that has finally come out, Timothy McGill, from a female saying her husband was threatening to harm himself. Okay. Upon arrival, a confrontation occurred with the male subject. Why do they can't call him a man, right? But they call him the male subject, which means that you're subject, right? You are not free. You are a subject. Male subject, which resulted in deputies firing shots, striking him. He was transported to the University of Tennessee Medical Center for treatment. No deputies were injured. Got to make sure about that. Agents are interviewing witnesses and collecting evidence. The agency does not identify officers involved in these types of incidents. And there are really not any new details from the AP, though the Washington Post picked up the AP story yesterday, or maybe it was maybe even Monday. But we have these kinds of encounters where you call for help and you have overwhelming assistance. Overwhelming assistance. And we have a man in very serious condition in the hospital, and he has a mental problem. So now the question is, on the story we've been developing on de-escalation techniques among people, when the law, so-called, the law deals with people who have what are called mental problems, right? I use the term mental problems because that's the accepted usage, the accepted wording. But in my mind, these are primarily religious problems. These are problems of understanding who God is and what God's role, what God ordains as a role in life and your duty in life. People who don't have any connection with God often have severe problems. They have enmity with man. They have, of course, enmity with God, enmity with man, and of course enmity with themselves. And so they can't settle the problems that the human spirit craves to solve, and that is the problem of the one and the many. It is a spiritual problem. It's not a metaphysical problem, but spiritual. It is a problem of ethics. Whose law do you obey? To whom are you responsible? Whom must you love and fear? What are your duties to God and man? And so these questions not being answered create mental problems. Okay, so we have mental problems. Timothy McGill called for help by his wife, and he ends up getting a bullet in him, at least one bullet in him. This is a grave problem. And the sheriff's campaign, in which Victor Miller, the Democrat, is challenging Jim Hammond, the sheriff. This is the venue for this discussion. And you, my listener, I encourage you to ask these questions. Do not think these questions don't matter. You ask the questions. We've heard from Jim Hammond about de-escalation. There are a few officers in Chattanooga, and the sheriff's department take this de-escalation class, but should it not be mandatory? And should not we overturn the training routine rather than 100 hours on learning how to kill and maim and tase and gas, and 8 hours on de-escalation? How about turning that upside down? David Tulis.
Traffic, news, and information. Nooga Radio. Digital FM 95.